I'm Ryan Halford, and I love craniosacral therapy. From the theory to the practice to the people, there's always something in cranial work that fuels a sense of adventure in my life. I'd like to share that adventure with you on the Craniosacral Podcast. Hello, my craniosacral friends. I am so happy you have decided to tune in to episode 27 today. So today we will hear from a key player in the biodynamic world, Michael Kern. He's the founder of the Craniosacral Therapy Educational Trust in London, England. But before we get into the interview, I would like to take a minute to recognize you. Yes, you. I would like to thank you for your interest and dedication to craniosacral therapy. The work we do is so important and so needed in the world. I want to recognize you and your commitment to living a life of helping other people through the beautiful and sacred art of physical touch. At times, we have the great joy of getting lots of positive feedback from our clients. But just in case you aren't feeling that lately, feeling supported or encouraged, I want to tell you thank you for the care you give the people who arrive at your door needing help. Thank you for approaching your work conscientiously with heart. You are making a difference. We don't always see this in the course of a professional practice. Sometimes we encounter dry spells. But as the years pass, we come to see that as a whole, we have been a powerful and positive influence in the lives of many people in our community. So take heart, my friends. Continue forth offering your gifts. The world needs you. People need you. And you are making a difference. Today we will spend some time with Michael Kern. Michael is the author of the book Wisdom in the Body. Now, Wisdom in the Body was one of the first books ever published that explained biodynamic therapy. It is a very accessible, easy to read text that covers a great deal of ground around essential concepts of our work. So Michael goes way back in the evolution of biodynamic therapy. He has a close relationship with Franklin Sills and Michael Shea and just about all of the other thought leaders in the field of craniosacral therapy. Also, Michael organizes the Breath of Life conference that occurs in London every few years. He has been responsible for bringing together some of the most important figures in the world of therapy for lectures and public group panels at his conferences. I'm really excited to bring Michael to you, and I hope you pick up some good insights into the theory and clinical practice of our work, which really is all about our ability to access health. So sit back and enjoy my discussion with Michael about health, the foundational principle in our work. Okay, everyone. I am here with Michael Kern. Uh, those of you from the biodynamic community are undoubtedly going to know who Michael is. He's a very key figure in the biodynamic movements, we could say. And now, those of you that may have more of an upledger background have learned more about Michael from my introduction. So I'm very excited to have Michael here. When I first started this podcast, he was one of the key people I had in mind. And now finally, months in, after adjusting our schedules, we are very fortunate to have him here with us. So it's the afternoon where you are, Michael. You want to say hi?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. And Ryan, many thanks for the introduction. And I'm really delighted to be talking with you now. I'm also excited and just to kind of see where our conversation is going to go. Who knows what we might get into. But very much looking forward to this connection with you and with your audience.
Great. I am too. It's a real honor to have you on. And And we have decided to, as a basic topic today, to discuss health, to discuss finding health, a very core principle for biodynamic therapists. And what I wanted to do to kind of kick off our discussion today is mention a very famous quote from Dr. Still that to find health should be the object of the physician. Anyone can find disease, and that's from the philosophy of osteopathy. I'm wondering what this quote means for you now, Michael, with your decades of experience in the work. What is health? How should we go about finding it?
Oh, okay. Well, I think you've got a few questions in one there. But for me, this has been one of the most inspiring quotes in our field, in our practice. And it's one of the things that really drew me into this work, many, many years ago. And I think it's, in a way, what Dr. Still was pointing out is something very, very unique. Most medical systems, whether they're so-called complementary healthcare systems or holistic systems or allopathic systems, are really based on trying to combat the disease, trying to, in some way get rid of the problems. And I think what Dr. Still was directing us towards is an appreciation of something which is never diseased, an appreciation of a part of ourselves, a level which is, we can say, a kind of a basic goodness, a basic wholeness, and a basic vitality, which is always present, which, if we're able to access that, this becomes the kind of primary way that we can then start to deal with any disease or pathological processes. So for me, it's just a very beautiful and different way to approach our clients in our practices, so that we really start to synchronize to what is right rather than, and what is working, what is functioning, rather than what is wrong. And that by promoting what is right, whatever it is that's difficult, whatever it is that's struggling, whatever it is that is fragmented, then has a far greater opportunity to resolve.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so tempting when someone comes into the clinic to focus on the problems that they are bringing to us. It's at the forefront of their experience. And quite often, the first period that we interface with them in the interview, they are speaking quite extensively about the problem.
Yes.
And so often that's where the relationship starts off, focusing on this problem. And but really where the real gold is for us is in looking deeper than that into focusing on on that health.
Yes, that's right. And it's not, I mean, clearly it's not that we have to ignore the problems. I mean, clients are coming
Yeah.
because of, they're in pain, or they're suffering, or they're in some struggle and some difficulty. And we've got to find a way to meet with that in whatever way is appropriate for that person. But in terms of the actual treatment and in terms of the approaches that we take, if we're just focusing on the disease, the tendency is that we're going to just spin around within that disease cycle. There was a very famous quote, which of course I can't remember exactly, but it came from Einstein, that problems are never solved from the same level from which they were created.
Yeah.
Somehow, we need to find another way, another relationship to the disease process or to the pathology from another place within ourselves, which, if we're then able to do that, then things, this really helps things to move forwards in a far clearer, far more efficient way.
Yeah. The great news here, I think, is that we have a choice on what we want to focus on. And that can be very empowering. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about this nature of health. How do we know maybe more specifically, when we're tapping into the greater forces of health?
Yeah, I think maybe I can just start by saying, let's maybe come up with one definition of health. And I think there are a number of really great definitions of health. But in the English language and from the Latin root, the word health derives from the same root as the word wholeness. So if we're
Oh,
talking about finding health or looking for health, we're talking about finding wholeness and orienting to wholeness. Now, wholeness is never not there. Of course, so much of the time we go through our lives not feeling particularly whole. We cut off, we get fragmented, we get overloaded, we get overwhelmed. But that doesn't mean that the basic wholeness isn't there, it isn't present. So I think one of the ways that we can orient to this in our clients is to, let's say, is to be able to take a wider view of the people who come to us, that we don't just see them as their diseases. We don't just see them as their struggles. We see them as people who are struggling, but within the context of wholeness, within the context of a far wider, let's say, a wider field of life and experience. Of course, experientially, I would say when we're going through difficulties, whether they be physical health difficulties, emotional, psychological health problems, it feels very, it very often takes us away from this connection to the goodness of life and to the wider field of life. We tend to very much get pulled into the difficulties, into the suffering. And my experience is that when we do that, that's the big suffering. That's really,
yeah.
it's not that I don't think we're always, I don't think that, this is of course one of the first teachings of the Buddha is that there is suffering. Suffering is an existent, is a natural part of whatever it is we go through in life. I don't think any of us have experienced key moments, gone through life without experiencing key moments of suffering and difficulty. But somehow, if we can reconnect within that experience to something that is okay, to some kind of basic goodness or something that is underneath that suffering, maybe we still feel the suffering, but it's not the big suffering. It's a suffering that somehow, let's say there's an okayness that goes with it.
Mm.
And there's something that makes it okay. There's something that helps us to move through that experience, whatever it might be, whatever it is we have to face. So I think one of the keys is to look for, where is the wholeness within this person? And a little bit later, I'd love to talk to you around how we can do this with biodynamics, because I think biodynamics does offer a very, I would say, elegant way and a very, I would say, true and clear way of orienting to wholeness, which I've certainly found unique and found clinically effective. So I think for me, one of the key aspects of finding health is around finding wholeness. But in terms of, also what you asked earlier was, how do we know we're in contact with health? How do we know, this is what we're in touch with? It's not an easy question to answer, but I would also say that there's a kind of a juiciness that's present
Uh-huh.
when we are in touch with our own health and with the health of somebody else, even in the midst of difficulty and suffering, disease and pathology. There's a kind of maybe you can call it a taste or a fragrance or a flavor, but there's a kind of there's a little, maybe we can call it a spark or something like that, something that is okay within whatever is that experience. And that's very much a direct sensory relationship to something. I think we all experience this in different ways. And, I don't want my words to be taken as some kind of definitive way that we've got to experience it, because individually we have our own way of getting there. But there's kind of, something, a little taste, a little glimpse, a little sense of okayness somewhere that lets us know that in the midst of whatever it is we're going through, something is okay.
Right. I like one of the first sentences you said was this basic sense of goodness, wholeness, and vitality. Those are all great little key words, I think, for us to keep in mind when we're exploring health. Lately, I'm really liking the vitality part of it.
Yes.
To me, I find myself being more aware of where that spark is, where that metabolic robustness is in their system. I've been exercising a lot lately, Michael, and I've been
Yes.
noticing that vitality rising in myself.
Yes.
And so I think that's just a really, really rich area for people to explore about feeling that spark of life, because that's where that potency seems to emerge from that can
Yes.
help to get work done on behalf of the client.
I think you're absolutely right. I think where we can acknowledge that spark or that urge or that vitality or that potency, when it gets acknowledged perceptually, and where I think the practitioner is often, maybe in many people's experience, the first person or the first person in a long time who was, perceptually relating to that sense of spark and vitality and okayness within, somebody who's going through a lot of difficulties. When we can come into contact with that, it affirms it, it deepens it, it allows it then to move and to flourish. And I think you're
Yes.
also, touching here, on maybe on something else, that we should name around health, that it's an active principle. It's not something, of course, many people would consider, well, when are you healthy? Well, it's when you're not suffering, when there's the absence of some kind of problem or disease. But I think it's far, far more than that. It's really a kind of something that's right there at our nature, at our core, as an active principle of life, that's always there. Um, I was very taken many years ago when I heard something from Dr. Becker when he talked about this vitality, this active principle. He called it the bioenergy of wellness. I think that's
Ah,
it's a really a kind of a great phrase.
yeah.
And he said the bioenergy of wellness is the most powerful force in the universe. And
Wow.
I sat with that and I thought about that and I kind of, and I think, goodness me, Dr. Becker is right. He didn't say it's something which is very strong. He didn't say it's something which is, will always act given the chance. He said it's the most powerful force in the universe. And I think as I've kind of now worked with, I don't know, many thousands of patients over the years, you can see this, no matter how awful somebody is feeling, no matter how exhausted they are, how riddled with disease their bodies might be, or how absolutely depressed and cut off they might be, there's still something, there's still that urge, that, as Becker would call it, the bioenergy of wellness, that urge to find health. There's still that urge to heal and to kind of come back into relationship with the basic wholeness and the basic goodness of life. And I don't think that's something that ever disappears, no matter how, whatever conditions are present. That urge is always there. We're always seeking that. We're always seeking happiness. We're always seeking wholeness. It just never goes away.
Mhm. I'm thinking, I believe it was Dr. Jealous saying health is never lost.
Yes, he's referring to the same thing, the same principle here.
Yeah. And that's been a very strongly guiding statement for me to consider when you're working with someone who might be considered very, very ill by regular medical standards, or working with someone who's in the process of dying.
Yes,
That there is this spark all the way up in until the end, and you just feel it always constant, just kind of changing and shifting its relationship
Yes.
towards the end. I've been struck at times in my own practice. I can be working with someone who, by all other medical standards, would be considered quite sick. But there's something about their life, their experience in the moment that seems healthier than maybe other people who don't have pronounced medical problems.
Yes. Yes.
This joy and awareness of the preciousness of the moment that sometimes very sick people can possess really speaks to me about health. And so this is a bit of a transition for some people to come to understand that maybe coming from a more allopathic model.
Yes, I think it is a difficult transition for for some of us to go through. But if we take this even to the extreme, Ryan, I mean, we can say that look, we're all going to die. Death is one of the natural cycles of life. Um, so of course, most of the time, isn't it, when a medical practitioner loses a patient when they die, we would have considered the doctor to have failed, and well,
Yeah,
they didn't survive, and it's unfortunate, but we tried our best. Um, so if we kind of take it even to that extreme, even in the midst of death, it raises a question. Can we die healthily? Can we die with a relationship to this basic goodness? And I think that we can, as this is what I'm saying, it's not about necessarily avoiding the suffering. It's not necessarily about avoiding, well, we're never going to avoid it anyway, no matter how much we think we can try. We may go through hopefully long periods of our lives where we're not in that suffering, but sooner or later it's going to be there. Sooner or later we're all going to die. So I think we're really talking about how these things happen, not just a question of whether they happen or not.
yeah. So I'm curious, when you're working in the clinic, working with a client that may seem to be having trouble accessing some of these aspects of health we have been talking about.
Yes.
They may seem to be really kind of mired in the suffering parts of their existence. Do you have any, maybe, I hate to say techniques, because that's kind of a loaded word in our field,
Sure, sure. Yeah.
but any strategies maybe for helping someone to bring their awareness maybe more oriented towards the health that is present within them?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think there are ways. And, what I want to be careful about with you now is that I don't want to give glib answers, because
Yeah.
there's, I think one of the features of the work that we do is that we come into relationship with an individual being, and what might be appropriate for one person is not necessarily appropriate for another. So, this is not a formulaic process. This is not
Yeah.
a technique that we can just practice and try on our clients. Um, and the other thing that I want to say also, and I will answer your question, but I want to give a couple of disclaimers before I do
Sure.
answer it. So that's the first disclaimer. The second one is that, it's not always easy, and you were talking about clients who are, let's say, in the mire and really in the, in difficult places. And, um, there are people who we meet in our work or in our lives or in our families where, whatever strategies we take, it's still going to be a challenge. It's still going to be difficult. So, I don't want to kind of give the impression that, there is some kind of, magic wand that we can wave and everything is going to be okay. But having said that, okay, um, I think that one key way that we work with in craniosacral biodynamics, which is probably unique to our work, is in our relationship and synchronization to primary respiration. In a way, this is what differentiates, let's say, what we do from what other therapists who are working in allied fields, which might also be great, which might also, offer a big support. But we're working with rhythmic motion, with subtle rhythmic motion, which are really expressions of these deeper forces of health, which are at play, which are working through the client, albeit in a somewhat restricted or held or locked up way. Those forces are still present. Those urges are still present. Those potencies are still present. So I think that, in my practice, one of the things that I'm always looking for is, how does primary respiration want to work here? What is it wanting to do? Where is it wanting to go? Are we able to come into contact with it? Are we able to synchronize with it? Because in that synchronization and in that recognition, somehow there's a support for it. There's an acknowledgement. It's almost like saying, okay, here we are. Here's something that's working. This we can now start to use as a starting point for a therapeutic process.
Yeah. It takes some pressure off of the therapist to not have to make these decisions for treatment just out of their own will or their own limited understanding.
Ah,
We have this constant vital force that's forming space that we can continually look to for some guidance as to what would be most helpful and appropriate in the moment.
yeah, yeah, again, I completely agree with what you're saying there, Ryan. I mean, for me, this was such a massive relief when I started to get
Yes.
this. Some people, I know when they're coming into this work, it's like, oh my God, can I trust the process and just trust this client's natural physiology and system to do whatever it needs to do and find ways to support that? It's a good, we have insecurities around that. But when I started to trust that more and more, you're absolutely right. It takes the pressure off of the practitioner. And it is such a huge relief, because at the end of the day, we can't rely on our opinions and on our concepts and on our ideas of what we think needs to happen for the client. But there is something else that we can just be able to sit back and rely on and trust. And if we can find that within ourselves, and if we can find that within the client, again, this provides a really good starting point for a therapeutic process.
Michael, when I was fairly new at this work, golly, this is almost 19 years ago or so now. I took a weekend class with an osteopath, and one of the first things he had us do is write down our definition of health. And I sat there with a pen in my hand, looking at the paper, having an instinctual understanding of what my experience of health was, but never having really owned a little bit more of a precise definition
Yes.
of health. And, I'm wondering if you have spent much energy in this direction of kind of coming up with your own definition of health.
Um, I'm not sure that I've spent too much energy trying to come up with my own definition of health, because I think there are such wonderful definitions out there that have been given to us by other people.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that, for me, I think one of the most radical definitions of health that I have ever come across was spoken again by Dr. Becker. And he said something quite extraordinary, quite simple. He said, health is related to a return to the freedom of interchange between body physiology and stillness.
Ooh.
Now, when I came across that, I thought, my God, that's an extraordinary definition. Let me just say that again, because it's really nice just to perhaps take that in. He said, health is related to a return to the freedom of interchange between body physiology and stillness. So,
Hmm.
okay, where does that take you?
That's just rich. I'm immediately transported into my clinic treatment space and reviewing my sensory experience of how much richness comes forth and how much support and stabilization and power comes from relating to stillness that feeds the motion of health that I
Yes,
sense.
yes. And that's right. And in a way, this kicks in a little to what we were just touching on at the early part of the conversation. The stillness is always there. The stillness is always present. It's always, it's underneath everything that we're doing and we're experiencing. It's really at the very core of ourselves and at the core of our being. And so, this is also why I just love Becker's definition, because so much in when we're experiencing difficulty and suffering, we're out of touch with that basic stillness. We've lost some kind of relationship to it. It's not that it's not there, it's that we've become fragmented from it at an experiential level.
Mhm.
And, when we're able to, find some of that stillness within our clients, even just for a split second, just to touch it, something else can begin to happen.
Yeah. There is a new point for reorganization of their system
Yes,
that they have lost access to. And one of our, I guess you could say, our responsibilities, I feel, as clinical practitioners, is to be able to tap into that fairly quickly by maybe the way we live our lives, our own spiritual or perceptual practices that we work into our day-to-day routine, so that hopefully we bring some skill into accessing that with our very presence
yes,
for people, because many have lost the ability to tap into that deep, slow-moving well of
yes,
health.
yes. Again, I agree with you there, Ryan, because how can we access the stillness within our clients if we can't access any stillness
Uh,
within ourselves? So, this is really so much about the skill of the practitioner, and
yeah,
and the implication here is that this is the therapeutic process is not just a question of what it is you're practicing, it's how you're practicing it. It's where you're coming from. What are the qualities that we're able to bring into that therapeutic relationship? What kind of space can we open up for people within the therapeutic relationship? And we need to, I would say one of the core skills is, and this is also one of the challenges of the work, is for we ourselves have to be able to find ways to let go, to let ourselves drop, to drop our agendas, to drop our opinions, our ideas, our concepts, in order to have some kind of direct experiential uh, relationship to, or just presence within the deeper stillness that we're referring to here.
and that's such a challenge for new students, especially, learning this work is, I have so much respect for people that undertake this path, because you're really dealing with a dichotomy of, we're learning new concepts, we are in essence learning to do to some extent, but simultaneously practicing and developing some faith and trust in this more, I'd say, intuitive, maybe instinctual ability to let any kind of directive processing go
Yes,
and really sink into whatever is arising in the moment. And what I love about this is, we often experience this arising of the moment as a really physical, spatial story that is unfolding. And for me, I just see and feel space being shifted, reorganized, the organizing fields that seem embedded in the ether behind the air, really going to work. So it's not that we're just totally giving up to some kind of void nothingness. It's giving up to a deeper kind of organization that it feels trustworthy.
Yes.
You know, we can trust it.
Yes. Yeah. Um, and it is. This is one of the big challenges, I think, in this practice, is that because the implication is that again, an effective therapeutic process is going to take place as much as a function of the quality of being or presence of the practitioner as it is to do anything to do with their, let's say, their quality of doing, of whatever
Yeah.
skills or techniques, or so just simply that quality of presence and being is going to be a key factor in what can help things to move forwards or help the client to access some of the health that's present within inside themselves.
Yeah. All right. Can you tell me, give me some examples, like tell me a story or two about how health moves, how health emerges in clients' lives, if you got anything for me.
Um, well, I can tell you one story that was very moving, which on the surface of it is, let's say, uh, if I told you it just on a superficial level, you would think, my goodness, that's not a particularly good outcome for a therapeutic process.
Well,
Um,
try
but
us.
um, many years ago, I was treating quite an elderly lady, and I hadn't heard from her for it must have been a number of months, and I kind of heard that she wasn't so well. She actually was a neighbor of mine. She lived in the same street, but I hadn't seen her for a while, and one day I got a telephone call from her. And she said in this rather kind of urgent voice, but somewhat, not feeling too great. She said, "Michael, will you please come over? I just really need to talk to you." And so I arranged to go over. She lived, as I say, in the same street, so it wasn't a big issue to just go over to her home. And I think I did it the next day, and she was lying in bed and was very, very weak. She'd had been diagnosed with cancer, and was clearly not feeling particularly well. Um, and but she wanted to talk to me, and she started to ask me. She said straight away, in a very childlike and very kind of innocent way, which actually I found really very refreshing. She said to me, "What do you think happens when we die?" And I was a little
Mm.
bit taken aback, and I kind of said, "Well, I have to say, I really don't know." And she said, "Well, do you think we go on? Do you think we survive?" And I said, "Well, again, I've got, I don't, I've got ideas, but I didn't want to just give her my ideas. Um, so I said, I really, I don't know, but I'm sure we're all going to find out sometime." But she kept wanting to press this. She said, "I really want to talk about this." You see, I try and talk about it to my sister, and she says to me, "Oh, don't talk about dying. You're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. Don't worry. Everything's going to be okay." So I started to ask her, I said, "Well, what do you think? What's your feeling?" She says, "Well, I don't know, but I feel that death isn't the end. I feel something goes on." And she just started to explore this. And she started to explore her fear around this. Would there be something? Would there not be something? After leaving her body after dying. And it was just very, very interesting and very beautiful to listen to her. I have to say, I found her questioning and her inquiring to be very, very fresh, very innocent, very almost childlike. But, I'm primarily a hands-on practitioner. I'm a hands-on therapist. And so at the end of this conversation, I said to her, well, how would it be if I put my hands on you? And, we did a little tuning in to see what wants to happen. And she said, yes, very, very good. So she was in bed and I put my hands on her. I think I put my hands, managed to find a way to put it on her shoulders and make a contact at her shoulders. And there was a bit of settling, and then made a contact at the sacrum. And after a little while, you could just feel a lot of this very strong activity and very strong, I can't think of the right word, but kind of activation and stress and anxiety starting to settle within her body. So I had my hand under her sacrum, and we started to feel the presence of some slowing down, a slower kind of movement, not this sort of anxious, very jittery, fearful questioning that she'd started out with, although she was doing it in a way that I think was completely genuine and authentic for her. And we started to feel some of that settling, some of that dropping, some of that, just, moving a little bit into the periphery. And at that point, there was a very deep peace that came into the room, and we both felt it. And, it was really, it was like we both kind of, just took a breath, and it was like, oh, okay, here's, underneath all of that, here's something that's okay. There was just that quality, and it was a very, I can still feel it right now, even though this happened
Yeah.
a number of years ago, and just being in that room with her and feeling this, this lovely, kind of, almost like liquidy, warm presence of peace and okayness was very, very special. And so anyway, I said my goodbyes and, said, look, we'll be in touch and whatever. And I got a telephone call from her sister 2 days later to tell me that that night she had died in her sleep,
Mhm.
and she had died peacefully, and she just wanted to let me know. And on the surface of it, I mean, you can think, oh my God, what did I do? Did I kill her? Did,
Yeah.
this is, but actually, when I reflect on it, I think that in that instance, the connection to health just helped her to move into a peaceful death, into a healthy death. And that's something, I to this day, I'm telling you this story because I think it was probably one of the, not that I gave the treatment as such, but it was one of the best treatments that I was ever, I ever gave, that I was ever part of,
Yeah.
and touched me very, very deeply.
Yeah. That story to me really speaks of a victory.
Yes,
You know.
yeah,
Yeah. I think there's such an inherent part of the human that wants to fight death or resist it.
yes,
Dealing with that unknown. And I have found that this kind of work can soften some of the anxiety around the process of dying.
yes,
And I think that is a tremendous service we offer. Now, I'm by no means an expert in the field. I only have a handful of experiences with hospice or similar experiences like that. But I know that there is growing interest in the combination of these types of work, and I'm hoping to have some people on that have more direct experience with aiding people in the dying
Yes,
process. I feel like it's such a gift that we can offer to help people that may
yes.
be facing
Yeah, and of course it was, it was one of Dr. Sutherland's key moments in the in the development of his understanding of primary respiration, when he had his hands on a patient as they were dying and he felt the presence of something leaving, of a transmutation, something leaving, not an ending. And again, this really also helped to shift his perception of what is primary respiration, what it is we're actually working with in this practice. And, having said this also, Ryan, I mean, the other side of it is, that's one story, but the other side of it is you never know what's going to happen. Of course, sooner or later we're all going to die, but you never know what is possible, because when we're starting to contact these, we could say, formative forces, the creative forces of primary respiration. These are essentially the forces that create us. These are the forces that maintain us, that sustain us, and that heal us. When we start to contact these forces, you never know what's possible. And so maybe from telling you one story of a client who died healthily, maybe how would it be if I told you another story of a client who seems to be living healthily in the face of the most extraordinary odds against her?
I'm loving story time with Michael. Please
Yes.
continue.
Oh, trust me.
Yes.
Listen, if you like stories, I've got lots and lots of stories. I love telling stories. So I really,
Stories are a great way for us to learn.
yeah, me too. I mean, I learn from these experiences, and yeah, some of these stories and some of these experiences have really helped to shape what I do in my practice and how I teach this work as well. Um, so this is a story of a colleague of mine. She's a lady in her 40s, so not, quite a, excuse me, from my age, quite a young woman.
Mhm.
And she'd done my training course in London a few years earlier. So she was a craniosacral practitioner. She's also has been a yoga teacher. So somebody quite involved in holistic approaches to health. And I hadn't heard from her for a little while. And again, got a phone call. She called me up and asked if it would be possible for me to come over, that she'd been seriously ill, and could I go and do a home visit? So I was happy to be able to do that. And I walked into her apartment and she was lying in bed. And I have to tell you, I was shocked. And I've seen a lot of people who are not well, who come in with a wide variety of very difficult conditions and diseases. But this was a real shock for me to see this woman as she was in bed. And the story was that she hadn't been out of bed for 3 months. She'd
Whoa.
had a recurrence of breast cancer.
Mm.
She had lost a huge amount of weight. She was clearly very weak, very pallid. And she'd had the idea that she was going to fight this disease by herself. She did not want to go down the medical route. She didn't want to call her doctors. She didn't want to, go into the medical system. She felt that she could do this, just using her own ways, her own methods, and she was kind of feeling, I would say, quite stubborn around that. And by the time I saw her, she was a real mess. I don't want to go into kind of too many gory details here, but the breast was just an open wound. Wow. She was hardly able to breathe. She'd had 3 spinal fractures because of the bones just crumbling with tumors. 2 weeks earlier, she'd fractured her upper arm, her upper humerus, because somebody had leaned on it and the bone just snapped. Again, just with the presence of tumors. And, it was like, oh my God, what, do you know what I mean? Where do you begin, kind of thing? This was the... So anyway, I didn't kind of want to give her thoughts and opinions. The first thought was, my God, get yourself into hospital. You know what I mean? It wasn't, this is beyond, of where you are right now. But anyway, I put my hands on her and we did a session. It went on whatever it was, 40 minutes, and nothing very dramatic, but really feeling the deep weakness within her system, and just the sense of very little available potency. There was very little sense of a rhythm, very little sense of a tide. But, just simply held her within that space. And whether it was down to the fact that she just felt that she was ready to start reaching out for help, or whether it was anything to do with the hands-on, I've absolutely no idea. But the next day, she contacted her doctor, who came over and immediately took one look at her and immediately sent for an ambulance, and she was rushed off to hospital. So she was taken to one of the major hospitals in the centre of London, which is where I live. So I received a message from her once she'd been admitted to hospital. Will you please come over and do some hands-on? To see, just to help. She found it would be helpful. She thought it would be helpful to do this. So I gladly agreed and went over there. And during the time that she'd been admitted to hospital, she'd had numerous tests done, and it had been found that her lungs were full of tumors. One large tumor in her left lung, I think it was, a lot of inflammation. So the doctors fitted a stent to drain some of the fluid that was coming in, accumulating in her lungs, so that she could start to breathe more easily. At one point, during this process, she was giving off about 1.5 liters of fluid a day. So there was an enormous amount of inflammation, and fluid that was being given off through the tumors in her lungs. They'd found tumors in all her bones, in her liver. They'd found tumors in her brain. So basically, this is somebody, whose whole body was just riddled with cancer. And there was nothing that the medics could do here. I mean, she was beyond chemotherapy at that point, was beyond radiotherapy. There wasn't really any kind of treatment. It had all gone too far. So she was getting palliative care, to try and help her get as comfortable as possible and reduce the pain. She was, I can't remember if I mentioned, she was put on some heavy-duty morphine just to help to deal with the pain. So she asked if it was possible to come over, and I went there and we did some hands-on work, and she wanted to have some work done on a regular basis. And I'm not able to get in there, because I'm teaching and I'm doing some traveling as well. So I wasn't able to get in there on a weekly basis. But there was a colleague of mine who we contacted. And so some weeks I was able to go in, and then he was able to go in every week. So some weeks she was getting 2 hands-on craniosacral sessions a week, and other weeks she was getting 1. And, she was finding the work helpful, but it was still this sense of, when you put your hands on, she was very open to the work, she was very receptive, but there was a tremendous weakness that was there. And I think, one of the orientations that I wanted to take with her was to really work with her from a place of spaciousness, from a place that, in biodynamic practice, we would call it a wide perceptual field, a place of listening, not just to what's going on within her, in her body and within the field around the body, but within this wider field of health that Dr. Sutherland called the ocean of primary respiration. So my orientation was really listening as best I could to the ocean all around us, to this ocean of primary respiration and health, and just seeing what could be possible, how this might start to interface with her and with her body physiology. And I remember probably after about 5 or 6 visits, I was sitting up, and she had a bed near the window up on the 10th floor of this hospital in central London. And there I was with my hands on her, listening to this wide field, going right the way across London with these wonderful views and the sense of sky and spaciousness and, across the city. And just starting to feel, this quality of spaciousness. And I think for the first time in those sessions that I'd been treating her, she started to also experience some of the spaciousness that was around her. And and at the end of the session, we looked at each other and we just kind of acknowledged, that was really nice. That felt peaceful. That felt like it really, there was something we were connecting to there that felt inherently good.
Mm-hmm.
So we continued with this work, and, this is a little bit of a long story, but it's nice to pick out some of the details of it. We continued with the work over, I went in to see her, and then maybe a couple of weeks later, again, we started to, both of us, feel the presence of the slower movement of primary respiration. And my experience of this kind of basic field of health is not that it's something that we're doing, but it's more something that's doing us. So it's the sense of being held or suspended or breathed by something else, by something that is, beyond just our individual sense of self. And we both sat there and in this treatment feeling like we were being held by something, being breathed by something. And again, it was, just a very beautiful experience. And it was so lovely to be able to share that space with her. There she was, still riddled with disease, on painkillers, but still, still very gracious and smiling and open to, the support and the love of everybody around her who was, really caring about her, and she was getting some wonderful, wonderful care. And then after maybe a few more sessions, we had another treatment where and this was also, I have to say, Ryan, in a shared ward in a hospital. We closed these little curtains around her bed and created this little
Wow.
cocoon. But there were people around us, and there were other patients and other visitors. This was going on. But there was another session that we did where we both felt the deep stillness, the presence of what we would call, and what Dr. Becker named, the dynamic stillness. This basic, I call it the big stillness, the mother of all stillnesses, the stillness that's, underneath everything.
Mhm.
And we just both dropped into a place. Again, I was holding her physiology, I was holding her body, and things were starting to slow down and drop and let go and let go. And this palpable, deep stillness came into the room that was just unmistakable. The next week, when I came to see her, she was sitting up in bed. And I hadn't seen her sit up for whatever it was, 4 months or something, in the time that, I don't think I know I hadn't been treating her for 4 months. She'd been in bed for about 4 months or something like that, maybe 5 months. I certainly hadn't seen her sitting up for any of the time that I'd been visiting her, but there was a little bit more something starting to come back. Anyway, we continued with this work. And after about 3 months of being in the hospital didn't know what else to do with her. So she was transferred to a hospice. And this is usually a place where you would go to, you wouldn't expect to walk back out of the place like this. It's again, giving fantastic palliative care. But this is a place where, chronically sick people will be going and, to receive the best care possible. But we continued with this work. And she continued. It was, there was something, I talked to her a little bit about this. It was as if something in her had surrendered. She's a very bright, intelligent woman. She knew that she was dying. And there was something that had just given up. And in that surrender and in that giving up, she became more and more open to whatever it was that needed to happen. So there was this, I have to say, I really enjoy, I'm still working with her. I really enjoy, and I enjoyed working with her because she also really created a space for the work to take place, for the work to happen. And so we had, many, many sessions then. This went on over, a number of months where, she was able to take in more of a sense of primary respiration, the slower movement of primary respiration, the slower movement of health. And you could start to see the effect. The inflammation in her lungs started to reduce. So from having her lungs being drained on a daily basis, it then started to happen, every other day. And then they started to drain the lungs every 2 days, and then once a week. And then basically there was no more need for draining fluid from her lungs. And she wasn't really being, I can say this in a kind of a jokey way, she wasn't being cooperative. She wasn't dying. She wasn't doing what, everybody thought that she was going to do. And, here she was, whatever it was then, this was now 4, 5, 6 months later. And she was, starting to, each, almost like with each week, you could start to feel a little bit more of the spark that we were talking about right at the beginning of this conversation, a little bit more of the, just the peace and the quality of stillness and the, the sense of access to the health that's all around us. And slowly, slowly, she started to come back. Um, After about 6 months in the hospice, they didn't know what to do with her anymore. So she was transferred back to her home, and we continued with the work, and she continued to get well. Now, during this period, I want to say she had a large tumor in her hip, and this was the main place in her body where she was getting a lot of pain. So they decided to try and zap that tumor with some radiotherapy. But apart from that, she wasn't getting any other kind of treatment. Um, and she started to get stronger. She started to improve. She started to reduce the morphine. She started to move around, so she started to cook, and she, with crutches, was moving around her apartment and cooking, and starting to become more and more self-sufficient. And something else was happening to her, and it was, of course, we don't really know what was going on, but it seemed to be connected to the time that she started to just to really drop into a deeper stillness and into a greater openness, for whatever it was that life needed to bring. About 3 months ago, so this was, she was first admitted to hospital about, must be about 2.5 years ago now. So she's now been back in her apartment for well over a year. About 3 or 4 months ago, I suggested to her that I could see her on a more regular basis if she came to see me rather than I went to see her. So she started to do that. So she comes to my practice now. And about a month ago, she went for a latest scan through the radiologists. And this is, scanning her brain, scanning her liver, scanning her lungs, scanning her bones, and they could find no sign of any cancer anywhere.
Wow.
Now, that is I'm telling you the story because that's just the greatest turnaround that I think I have ever witnessed with anybody. And it has just, and this is very fresh for me. This is somebody who, I'm still working with. And it just, speaks to me of, you just never know what's possible. You never know, this, you just, the potential for health, the potential for healing, the potential to be recreated, reformed. If we start to synchronize, if we start to connect to these forces of health, which are essentially, these are, in biodynamics, we talk about them as embryological forces. These are the forces that created us in the first place. These are the forces that, we sense shape our physiologies. If we start to reconnect to those forces, you just can never, ever tell what is possible. Now, I'm also being very cautious here, Ryan. I'm not saying this is a be-all and an end-all cure for cancer. You cannot say that. Everybody's got their own, their own way, their own path, their own, whatever it is, their own destiny, who knows what it might be. But it just talked to me of, you never know what's possible. And if we
Right.
can hold that possibility, that openness for the health in life to play through us, whether we live or whether we die, we're going to do it in the best possible way.
One of the things I like about that story, Michael, other than the positive outcome, is the sense of timing. The time frame of this story really spread out over quite some time.
Yes,
This isn't a story about, instantaneous healing that occurs right in the clinic. This is about a dedication and a commitment to a relationship, to a belief. And I really like that this is something that you two stayed with over time and had some trust in the slower unfoldings of this kind of work. I think that's really a big lesson in that
yes.
story.
Yes, that's right, and I think it is a process. I mean, in this instance, the fact that she just managed to stay alive, just about for long enough to
Yeah.
allow, for the possibility of something to happen was obviously very key. But yeah, this was, and I think it's, of course, a lot of us in life and in therapy are looking for quick fixes, and it does happen. It's we say, that, sometimes, healing will happen instantaneously. If you connect to the forces that are, those therapeutic forces, healing can be, quite spontaneous, quite instantaneous. But I think very often, what we're touching on here is that the process that allows for that healing is often a very, it's a long drawn out process. It's a process that involves the gradual, let's say, the softening of our, of the patterns that fragment us from that source of health.
Yeah, I find myself as I have more experience with this work, moving more and more towards a space where I want to hold the entirety of the client's life in my hands,
Yes,
in my awareness, really feeling them all the way back to their embryological time, all the way to their conception, and whenever I'm with them, trying to hold that big of a space of all that has happened, all that might need to happen with them. And I find that we can get to a more genuine place of
yes.
depth when I have my mind in that larger frame.
And I think it's not just, when we're talking about this, it's not just a question of, holding what has happened. It's actually holding what is already happening, what is happening right now. It's not that we
Yeah.
need to regress, that we have to go back to relive our embryological experiences or traumas or birth traumas or early childhood traumas. Sometimes, of course, they will come up as part of a therapeutic process, and we need to find ways to come into relationship with those experiences in a way that, from a place of health, from a place of, of whatever okayness we can find. But it's not about regression. It's about, that our embryology is happening right now. We talk about, there's been a little while ago, there was a big movement within the therapeutic communities that were talking about, reconnecting to your inner child, the sense of inner, whatever playfulness and spontaneousness, well, that's wonderful, great. But, we can also connect to our inner baby. We can also connect to our inner embryo. There is, these, these experiences of what it was like to be formed, of what it's like, are still happening because we're constantly forming. We're constantly in this process. It's not something that has stopped. So, I just want to say, the access to connect to our embryology, to our early experience is not regression. It's really right now in the present time, in the present moment.
Yes. Wow. Well, I'm feeling really good in my body right now after hearing that story.
Oh, good. Well, hope I hope some of your listeners are too. Some of our listeners, not your listeners.
Yes,
I'm part of this,
yes,
so yeah, I know it's lovely to be able to share these stories. This is because I think this, this that we're talking about here. We're not talking about techniques. We're talking about you know qualities that we can bring into this work, into this practice, which I think you know are equally, if not more important.
yes. Well, I'm feeling, Michael, like I kind of like to shift the nature of our conversation a little bit here, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
sure. Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
And one of the things I like to do on this really special opportunity we have for more people to get to know you and your work is to ask you a couple of fun personal questions about yourself.
Oh, go on then.
And one of the ones that I've asked a few people in the past that listeners have told me they really like is if you could go back and mentor yourself when you first got started in craniosacral therapy, how would you coach yourself? In retrospect, what areas did you personally need the most growth or help in?
Um, okay, I think if I could talk to my younger self and give him some advice, I would probably tell him not to be so responsible, not to take so much responsibility. I think so. It would be to really do what Dr. Sutherland asked us to do, and that is to trust the tide, to trust the health, to trust the therapeutic forces of primary respiration, to create the conditions for that. This is where we've got our responsibility. We do have skills. It's not just about, sitting back and saying, okay, get on with it. This has got nothing to do with me. But it's to be able to create conditions whereby healing can happen. But to realize that the responsibility for that is, is not within me as a practitioner. It's within the client. What can I say? My skills would be to do whatever it is that I could do to help the client access that direct connection, that direct relationship to primary respiration within themselves. But I'm not in control of that process. And I think what's happened over the years is that I've been able to, as it were, sit back more and more and trust that process. And when I've been able to do that, which involves, quite honestly, just sometimes getting out of the way with my ego, getting out of the way with my needs,
Mhm.
and to be able to hold the space for allowing something else to happen. My experience has been that whatever it is that needs to heal, it can heal more effectively, more quickly than when I was trying to take responsibility and trying to kind of try new things and be clever and direct the process.
B- Being clever, yes, quite often holds us back.
Too damn clever for our own boots sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So, a question I've never asked a guest, but I think it may be helpful again in helping us understand your journey,
Yes.
is who was the most influential figure in your childhood?
Ah, I think it's got to be at a certain key moment in my life. It's got to be my grandmother.
Oh.
Um, and I was, very, very honestly, Ryan, such a shy and withdrawn child. I think I was somebody who, had very very few social skills.
Really?
I'm not sure how many I've got these days, but I mean, if you would have told honestly, if you would have told me as a child that, I would be standing up in front of a group of people and talking and, maybe for 4 days at a stretch, or, speaking in front of a large audience, I would think, oh, don't be ridiculous. I was really, I was so afraid of being seen. I was,
Yes. Yeah.
it was like, it's very, very with. But around my teenage years, I started, and this was really from a place, I would say, of just desperation, started to look at things like meditation, yoga, more holistic ways of looking at life. And particularly, I would say around 18 years of age, I kind of began on a search, to find myself. That was because I just realized, what I was seeing just, I was not really feeling very connected to. And my grandmother was a healer she learned from her mother, who was from Romania and learned in the gypsy tradition of healing. So she was actually, my great grandmother was apparently quite a well-known healer in those days. And then throughout my childhood, my grandmother would kind of step into the picture sometimes. And, when there was a family illness, she would do an invocation, or she would put hands on, and I saw how this worked. So at the time that I was starting to begin to explore these things for myself. I would say my parents were pretty worried. They thought I was going to join some cult, and they were worried that they were going to kind of lose their little kid or whatever it was. So I started to talk to my grandmother about these things, and she was just so affirmative and so supportive. And she just said to me, "Yes, Michael, this is great. You've really got to look at this. You really, So I used to go over there, and I used to have, I used to talk to her about meditation. I used to talk to her about spiritual things. I used to talk to her about, what I was getting interested in healing and therapy. And she was just so encouraging. She just said, yes, yes, yes,
That's great.
you really need to look at that. And I feel, that I was able to then kind of carry her empowerment, as I began to explore whatever path was right for me. So that's a very precious thing that I still carry with me today.
Wow. Sounds like a really neat lady.
She was a remarkable lady. I mean, boy, I could tell you some stories about her, but then that would be another conversation, I think, because, but she was quite a character, and somebody who had, a real clear sense around the power of intention, and, and also, what we are capable of as human beings. And I kind of saw that modeled to some degree in her, and that was a great influence.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. I think when we hear stories like that, it helps us all appreciate the people who have been supportive in our own lives.
Yes.
Well, to kind of begin to conclude, because I
Yes.
need to get to the clinic, I have a full day of treatment today. I wanted to point out to people they may not know that you have been responsible for organizing the Breath of Life conference for some time now, correct?
Yes, yeah, this is something we started around, God, I think it must be around 15 years ago now. That together with a colleague, I've been organizing these gatherings in London that we've been doing every couple of years. Um, and
And the next
really,
one is next year,
the
right?
next one is next year. Yeah, actually, we've given ourselves a little bit of a break. We didn't organize one last year, but we are going to be organizing one next year. So we've got our speakers now pretty well in place. But these are kind of gatherings for, I mean, they're largely attended by craniosacral therapists and cranial osteopaths, but they're open to all therapists, and we get, big international contingent. People come from around the world. And we just like to, to be honest, Ryan, I invite the people who I'm interested in hearing. So,
Sure.
we love to invite, pioneering teachers from the field of craniosacral therapy, from the field of biodynamics, cranial osteopathy, but also allied fields, scientists, people working, helping to develop a understanding within the field of trauma and attachment or in the field of physics and biology. So we've been just blessed over the years to have some of the leading lights coming and presenting at our conferences. I mean, if you go onto our website, you will see some of the people who we've had over the last few years. But we've been really honoured that they've come and that they've connected with our craniosacral community and have come and shared their expertise and their research and their experience with our community, which I think has really helped to, let's say, broaden our understanding and opened up our eyes to things that can support the work that we do.
Yeah, you have had some of the biggest names in not just our field, but related fields share the stage at your conference, and I think that is very cool. I will put a link through to your page on the show notes, everybody, if you just want to click straight through. But
Sure.
Michael, can you remind us your website? Is it cranio.co.uk? Is
Sure.
that it?
So I have a training school in London.
Uh,
We offer 2-year part-time trainings in craniosacral biodynamics. We start these every year. We also have lots of advanced classes for people already in practice. There's also introductory taster classes. So people can certainly go to the website of my school to find out a little bit about that. And the web address is www.cranio, cranio.co.uk. We also have a separate website for the Breath of Life conference,
okay.
and that is www.breathoflifeconference.co.uk. So people can find out a bit more about that. But if your listeners just want to get a little bit more, the next conference is on May 13th, 14th next year. And can I say a few people who we're delighted to be hosting next year?
You got quite a roster. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, all right. So we're very happy that Bessel van der Kolk is coming. He's a clinician and researcher and teacher in the field of post-traumatic stress, the author of The Body Keeps the Score. We've also got Dr. Gabor Mate, who's a renowned speaker and author of a number of books, including In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts and When the Body Says No. We've got a great British cranial osteopath called Robert Lever, who has been in practice for about 40 plus years and been one of the pioneering teachers of cranial osteopathy in the UK and has written a wonderful book called At the Still Point of the Turning World. We've got Dr. Wendy McCarty, who's one of the pioneering teachers within the field of prenatal dynamics and prenatal psychology. And she's also written something called Welcoming Consciousness, Supporting Babies' Wholeness from the Beginning of Life. We've got the director of research at the HeartMath Institute, Dr. Roland McCraty, coming. We've also got a biologist called Dr. Gerald Pollack, who has written a groundbreaking book, which I think has many influences and connections to our work, called The Fourth Phase of Water.
Yeah.
And we've also got two teachers who are both present in the UK, teaching in the field of craniosacral biodynamics. There's Catherine Uclea and there's Sheriona Menzam-Sills, who are also going to be giving a shared presentation.
Oh, great.
And then the whole week after the conference is full of workshops, but people can go to the website and find out a little bit more if they feel they want to get any more information about that.
Great. So it's not just going into a couple of days of lectures. There's interactive learning experiences in workshop form as well.
Yes, there is. I mean, the main conference event is over the weekend of May 13, 14 next year. So the format is we'll have seven different presentations and, about an hour and a half each. And then there's a panel discussion at the end with all of the speakers together. So that's the main event. And, and then over the following week, there's going to be a number of workshops with the conference speakers really going on for the whole week after the conference. So if there's particular presenters who people want to study with in a little bit more depth, then there'll be that opportunity to do that.
Oh, okay, great, great. Okay, well, Michael, this has been a really neat day for me after having first seen your book, Wisdom in the Body, so many years ago, to finally get to connect with you more in person and share our passion for the work. I really want to issue my heartfelt gratitude to you.
And Ryan, it's been a real pleasure. I've loved talking to you. Anytime you want to do it again, you just let me know. There's more stories if people are not too bored from what I've been saying, but it's been a real pleasure, a real delight. And it's also really lovely to support the great work that you're doing in just helping to kind of put out these podcasts and increase awareness amongst, just not only amongst the craniosacral community, but amongst the wider community to the work that we're doing and holistic perspectives within our work and within our lives. So just a big, big thank you to Ryan. I feel really appreciative of what you're doing.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So that was Michael Kern. Please check out his website. There is a link to it in the show notes. He has a lot going on at his school, including various guest instructors throughout the year. And I also included in the notes a link to his book, Wisdom in the Body, as well as two titles from Dr. Roland Becker, a real luminary in our work. Please know that when you click through those links and make a purchase on Amazon, a small percentage of the sale comes back to support the podcast. If you have any feedback for me regarding this episode or any other ones, please shoot me an email, ryan@craniosacralpodcast.com. And you can also click on the blue SpeakPipe button on the homepage and leave me a voicemail message, a really long one if you want to. So until next time, my friends, I wish health to always be at the forefront of your experience.